Hello everyone, Stucker here.
And I'm Gabby.
And welcome back to the podcast, my host. Now, today we have a little bit of a special episode. I mean, I guess everything is special when we're kind of covering it. I don't know. I find pretty much everything in here to be interesting. It's just, for me, when I say like, oh, it's a special episode, it's like, is it really special or is it like something that I think it's neat and everyone else doesn't really necessarily care, but they like how passionate I am about it.
I think you found your people. I mean, some of these episodes have been weird. Like, you went so in depth into potatoes and tomatoes
to
and
this day, it's still people's favorite episode. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, it's like
the
everyone loves it.
I feel like the Crusades, they went on and on and on and on.
Right.
And no, I'm not judging.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. The Crusades one went on for quite a while. That's true. But today is special because today's episode is actually something that essentially is created by her. Now, if you can't see what I'm doing right now, if like you're listening on Spotify or Apple or any of those, like I'm pointing physically at my wife
at me
right here next to me. If you're on YouTube and you're physically seeing us here, awesome. Hey, yeah, I know I'm pretty. Thank you. Yeah, but what we're doing is we have the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. So it's just the YouTube version of this podcast. It's where I put the short form content of this podcast, like a little in-depth, like 5 to 8 minute video covering a specific topic. Like the one that just went up today is the story of the cane toads in Australia.
Which, honestly, what is up with Australia and their animal problems? Because like we've had emus, we've had what else have they? Rabbits,
cane toads, rabbits, emus, and there was also one with foxes, if I recall correctly.
Also, there's just the fact that everything in Australia actually just wants to kill you.
Yeah, which is really ironic for the cane toads, right? Because, and this is a little side bit, like obviously it's not the topic of what we're talking about today, but I have to give this little tidbit for anyone that wants to check it out. The cane toads, right? These are toads that are poisonous, not venomous, poisonous, because their body exudes a toxin through at all stages of life. So like whether it is a tadpole or whether it is a full-grown toad, all of it is toxic. So that means that even at the earliest stage, nothing is capable of eating them. So they are a creature specifically designed for a hostile environment like Australia, where everything wants to kill you. And nothing can kill and eat it. So it just explodes in population.
Hindsight is 2020, but honestly, I can't imagine one person at least, didn't go, hey, this doesn't seem like the best idea.
Correct. And that's actually one of the things that I cover in it. But if you want to know more details, you need to check out the video. Other than that, today's episode, the reason I got off topic, the reason why this whole thing is special is because this one was created by my wife because she wanted to start going into different topics that, well, she found particularly interesting. So Gabby, I have to ask then, why did you pick this one? Or do you want to go ahead and explain to people what it is we're going to be talking about?
Well, we're covering Spartan women because I think Spartan society is a hot topic. Everybody loves these Spartans. They were a, warlike society. But it really emphasizes men a lot of the time. And like, obviously they were pretty badass. We know they were amazing warriors, but also there were other members of society, and the Spartan societal structure, I think, is really interesting. So I was just curious to see how exactly women played a part in the society if they focused on physical fitness. I mean, I'm not a physically fit person. I'm not about to wrestle someone in an arena for a husband, but they did.
Wait, hold on.
In a sense, the women trained in physical prowess just, in order to show off how strong they were, because the stronger your wife was, the more chance you would have of having a strong warrior, which is honestly all they were about. They were just about creating more men to fight. So
here's the thing for anyone that may be a little bit confused when we talk about this. This is just a little preview so you're aware. Spartans were the original eugenics program.
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I was telling some people at work about one aspect of this, one of the responsibilities of the Spartan woman, which was to, I don't want to spoil it, but it was pretty barbaric, and it involved a rock and dropping fragile beings, and they were not okay. My coworkers are like, what?
Yeah.
Because you just don't expect it. I mean, obviously, if you think of a society where it's all about fitness, physical strength, what happens to people who aren't physically fit?
It's a matter of taking things to the logical extreme. Yeah.
So unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's not pretty. I don't go into too much detail, but it's there. You'll
It's
see.
there. So, as she said, what we're going to talk about today is Spartan women. So, as we probably did learn, again, Sparta was a very much a warrior society in ancient Greece, right? So, Sparta, which is also known as Lacedaemon, or Lacedaemon? Damon?
Oh, I
I'm
did
probably-
not look up the
I'm
pronunciation.
probably going to butcher that. I'm pretty sure it's Lacedaemon, because Damon
Well, it
is
came
like...
from Laconia.
Well, yeah,
So-
Laconia.
Yeah.
So if you have Lacedaemon, this was an ancient Greek city-state that was located in the very southern reaches of Greece in a place called Laconia, right? So the population of Sparta, essentially you had three different groups, right? You had the Spartans, or the Spartiates. These were the full citizens. Then you had the Helots, who were the serfs or slaves. And then you have a class of people in between. Now, I've seen it called several different things. The term that I always used was the perioikoi. And I say that specifically the perioikoi because it's like the peoples who were the like perosi or periosi. The idea behind it was these were the middlemen. So if you have three different classes of people and you had three different jobs, you had warrior, slave, and people who did everything else. That's
Pretty
it.
much.
That is the entirety of
But
society.
also the people who did everything else were, I think they were not citizens either.
Correct.
And they were not slaves, because the Helots were the slaves and they did pretty much all the menial tasks.
Correct.
And then this other group, the what do you
I called it the perioikoi. And the reason I even say that, for anyone that might jump on me from it, the reason that sticks around in my head is because you remember Rome 2 Total War?
No, can't say that I have. I do.
Yeah. Okay, I know you're screwing with me there, but in Rome 2 Total War, I still remember when I would learn a number of the things for pronunciation, because that's one of the first time I read so much of the stuff, but you hear it said for the first time in different forms of media, and then you're like, oh wait, is that how that's pronounced? And so as a result of playing so many of the different things between the like as the Spartans in that, it's the perioikoi, like the perioikoi hoplites, the javelin men, etc. Because during some times of war, they were drafted into combat, just not usually. You typically did not want them to be. It was like a desperate thing to pretty much have to. Well, I mean, the Helots were. Perioikoi was a bit more regular, but it depends. I'm getting way off topic here
what
again.
their name meant is they were just dwellers around. They were not, they didn't necessarily belong.
Those dudes over there.
Yeah,
like, these are the Spartans.
These middlemen, like, they exist. They do crafts. They're, I guess, traders.
They were everything.
But they're not us. And they're not beneath us. They're just...
Oh, no, they were definitely beneath.
Well, everyone was beneath the Spartans. Come on, are we kidding?
Yeah, I mean, that's how they would do it. So the idea behind it, right, is that you have, of course, the warriors. Every male Spartan citizen was a warrior. They were a citizen soldier, and that was their job. They were a soldier. That was everything. They didn't do anything for farming. They didn't do anything for any kind of pottery or any kind of craft, no sculpting, nothing. They were a warrior. That is it. The perioikoi, you would have the perioikoi who were the smiths. They were the potters. Like, they were the person, they would make your armor. They would make your weapon. They would make the everything. But they wouldn't typically fight unless they absolutely had to. But the Spartans typically didn't want the perioikoi or the Helots to be fighting, because if you trained the people that you oppress to fight...
Actually, that's in here. The Helots outnumbered the Spartans by a ridiculous amount.
Yeah.
Now I'm forgetting the actual numbers, which is pretty bad because I wrote this, but I wrote it a while ago. They were outnumbered. So everything that they did to these Helots was specifically to keep them under control, and they treated them horribly. They broke these people.
God, so bad.
I mean, Spartan society is so glorified, romanticized. I want you to dig into it. I'm not discrediting them. They did what they had to do given their circumstances, but wow.
It's one of those things. I always say this when it comes to history. For,
it's not great.
Different peoples and groups and cultures and things. We demonize and glorify so much in history. But the reality of the situation, as we probably learned already with the history of everything, is that generally speaking, people have been pretty shitty in the past. It's all just one giant story of people being shitty to one another. That's pretty much history, is how it goes. But as she said, the perioikoi, these were like the people who meant the dwellers around. They were the ones who were all around society, and they made everything for the Spartans. because the Spartans, Sparta as a state, like this entire entity was built on loyalty and military service. That was the entire thing. So from the age of 7, or was it 6?
7.
7.
7
Okay.
years old.
So it was from the age of 7, boys would be required to take part in something called the agoge, which is a rigorous state-sponsored education program. Imagine if, like, the second graders, like you just went into a class of second graders in an elementary school, right? You pulled them all out and you shipped them off to a military barracks where they have to fight each other for position, for food, for everything. The entire point of this programming, of this training, everything was, it was like if you mixed survival training with drugs and gym class.
Okay, he is not joking. Like, they had to get their own food. They had to fight for food. They had to fight each other. I mean, physical, like violence. It was violent. It wasn't just like let's wrestle. Here's some sticks. No, they actually tried to injure each other. And that is how they like placed as like warriors, were they like the toughest, like from a very, like imagine at the age of 7, like when we send our kids to school now, we're like, oh, I hope the other kids are nice to them. I hope they don't get bullied. And they send their kids to be bashed.
I'm not sure if you covered it in here, but they one of the things that was done was that boys were purposefully given less food than they would actually need in order to encourage them to steal food and fight others for food.
So I didn't go into like all of that detail on the training because I didn't want to crowd up the entire podcast.
It's true. We can't make the entire thing about the Spartan men.
Exactly. So I would love to do another podcast on just Spartan society as a whole because there is so much to dig into. I just had to pick out like the key main points so people could just get a general picture and how women would fit into this society.
Oh, you're entirely right.
I started actually another Word document that was just like different things about Spartan society that are really cool that we should definitely talk about.
Mind you, and again, for anyone that's going to jump on us, we're saying cool as a very like, oh, this is an interesting thing to learn about, not approval. This has been an issue in the past where I've said like, oh man, that's badass, but it's something that was pretty bad, but it was like crazy or great that it happened. Like not great as in good. Great.
I cry very easily. Like at no point in this am I like, wow, that is horribly violent and very, very mean.
You mean like the last episode with the serial killer in Russia?
Yeah, like I am not, no. I just think it is fascinating that their society implemented this, survived this, and grew from it somehow.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating.
We're
fascinating,
going to use the term grow lightly here because that's one of the crazy things is that it didn't really grow beyond, I mean, by nature of what it was, it couldn't really do so. I mean, we'll probably get into that for why.
The thing is, when I went into writing this, I had to read up so much because I actually don't know much about the Spartans apart from like the movie 300, which I've been told is one of the most accurate depictions of Spartans that you can find on the internet, right, Steve? Yeah, for sure.
Oil and all. I
actually had to do a lot of research, and I couldn't. It was really hard for me to. There are a lot of articles. Like when I was reading through articles, journals, people wanted to glorify them in ways where I was like, this is really spinning this in too positive of a light. Let me just look that up on another source. And then that source was like more realistic sounding. It was really hard to find that balance because between different, and I'm not knocking anyone. All of these people had like degrees and they obviously were experts.
There's a tendency when it comes to history.
Obviously, everybody has their lens. And I also tried really hard to just portray this and like as there were things I just completely left out because like that sounds like just full on speculative. The wording was really.
Well, welcome to a lot of history. We covered that before with like people. Oh, you have to use the terminology like, oh, they think that it meant this. It could have been this because a lot of stuff in history is speculation based off the evidence they find.
Oh no, they were like Spartan women actually were encouraged to grab other like men to have kids with, and I was trying to find more stuff on that. I couldn't find. I left a lot of stuff out. But anyway, let's jump into it.
We're going to keep on going into tangents about different things in here. It's just the way that it goes down. But like, okay, so the short of it is that the Spartan men from this young age, they were taught discipline, endurance, and being loyal to the state. Loyalty and discipline came before everything else, and that includes family. family didn't really matter. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy to us, but that was normal in this society because the Helots, as we spoke about, these were the captives from Laconia, Messenia, and essentially anywhere that the Spartans managed to capture slaves from during their times of war, which was they were often raiding for different things during the war season in order to be able to get captives to use. And these were from peoples who had been conquered by the Spartans and turned into slaves. The word Helot itself actually means captive. That's just what it is. And Helots would play this really vital role in Spartan society because they would handle all the tasks that kept society running. They did everything. The farmers, they were the servants, they were the nurses, they were the military attendant. They would carry all the stuff that the warriors would need. They would do everything. All unskilled labor roles, and maybe even a couple skilled ones, were filled by them. Whereas the true skilled roles, like with the actual artisans, that was done by the perioikoi. And this is where I think it goes to how outnumbered they were.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, having the Helots actually enabled the women to take on more of those like leadership roles in government and society and business.
Because they didn't have to do anything with the kids.
Exactly. And also, you raise your kids at the age of 7, you send them off. I mean, you obviously still have daughters, but at that point, you can train your daughter to help you with whatever else. And it just, honestly, I'm going to send all of my sons to boarding school.
Wait, are you implying that we're going to get Helots ourselves? That we're going to... Gabby?
No,
that is not...
No. I said I'm sending my kids to boarding school. I did
not. Hold on, boarding school?
Yeah.
Wait, why did I react stronger to boarding school than I did to the other idea?
I'm like concerned. Like, you should reflect on that.
I get it. The gist is that, yeah, Helots did allow the Spartan women to do all the things that they were able to do that in other societies they couldn't, because there was so much less that had to be taken care of themselves, right? And these Helots always had to be kept under control. The Spartans would use all different kinds of humiliation tactics to make the Helots lower or seem lower than what they actually were, which they were lesser in society to the Spartans, but they would have them do things like drink until they were inebriated and make fool of themselves in public. In addition, they would kill Helots that were too smart or too fit. In fact, there was something else that they would do here. Every year, there was a culling.
I'm going to need you to go into more detail because I didn't.
The gist is that by tradition, a young Spartan trying to be a warrior would have to kill a Helot. So one of the ways that they could train, and like in different techniques such as sneaking, like sabotage, like these kinds of things, their skills as a hunter and a warrior, is that they would sneak up onto a Helot and murder them.
Okay, so they thought they could prove, if I'm getting this right, they thought they could prove their prowess as a warrior by sneaking up on someone who isn't armed and killing them.
Oh, it was all because they'd be unarmed too. It's not like they're going out in full armor and just like, oh yes, I'm challenging this puny slave here. Like, no, they would go out. It's like hunting them down.
This sounds like something out of like a dystopian novel.
Spartan society pretty much was.
I love that for them. Love that for them.
It pretty much was, right? All of this is just done as an effort to not only separate the two, like, because you don't want them interacting as much, and simultaneously to make sure that the Helots knew that they were the lesser of society. That was like the idea of it. Now, again, you're probably thinking to yourself from this, like, okay, where do the women come in? Because you all are here. We've spent this whole time talking about the role of men, and we've kind of mentioned the stuff for women, but what did the women do here? Why is this supposed to be about them? Well, we had to give background information, as you said, to kind of set the stage so that people could understand what life in Sparta was like, so that you could understand what the women of this time would experience, right? Because the women did not participate in the agoge. They were not being sent there at the age of 7 to fight each other. They had no official actual role in the Spartan military, but they were given a formal education that was separate from the boys, and it wasn't done in a school. You see, in Sparta, women had full citizenship rights. The women of Sparta would have more rights and independence than pretty much any other Greek city-state. This was actually a bit of a contentious thing for a lot of different groups because many people, especially the Athenians, looked down upon the Spartans as being like controlled by their women effectively.
Okay, yes, Aristotle, homie, really let me down. Like,
No.
he
A Greek
did-
philosopher out of Athens
Okay,
let you down?
He did reside in Athens for most of his life.
Yeah.
So when he saw the Spartan women who basically ruled their men, like they were in charge, they ran the businesses, they inherited land, they owned properties, they wore short skirts.
Oh my
and
God, not the skirts.
participated in physical like trials. He said that they were destroying, like they were causing the decline of Spartan society.
Oh.
Now, I'm sure lots of things cause a decline of Spartan society, and I don't think this was it.
That inability to change was really the big thing.
Oh, well, I mean, they practice eugenics. People historically who have practiced eugenics are really bad at allowing change. You can look at it.
Yeah.
You could just look that up.
Yeah. Because the gist is in Athens, I mean, women were property, basically. Like
Yeah,
that was
in
they were
Athens-
owned by their husband.
And they also married younger. The women, they didn't get as much freedom. They couldn't really own land. They had to wear long formal clothing. They had to have long hair. Spartan women cut that off. Like they did not. They got married. They just sliced their hair off. They lived like that.
It's not good to be pulled. Yeah.
I mean,
there.
honestly, if you're fighting someone, first thing you gotta do is tie your hair up. Like it's just it gets in the way. First thing I do, not that I've been in many fights, but the ones I have been in, you gotta yank if they're wearing earrings, yank that off. You gotta yank the hair. I'm just saying, it's better to just cut it off, you know?
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And like this whole thing comes from the idea, like, not only could they do all this stuff with businesses, right? But since the men were so often away at war, that was their entire point of existence. Spartan women were going to be in charge of pretty much anything that was left behind. You had the roles in the government, you had agriculture, city planning, all different kinds of tasks associated with it. In other states, as we established, like Athens, the women were basically second-class citizens, but in Sparta, the women basically ruled the men. Like, they didn't actually rule the men, but it's like, while the men were fighting, they did everything else that kept society running and functioning. So the laws of Sparta had been reformed by a guy called King Lycurgus, or Lycurgus, I believe is what it is. I think it's Curgus. Lycurgus is how it is. And that was in the 9th century BC. He emphasized the importance of equality among all citizens. Girls were to be given the same physical fitness regimen as boys, though they weren't going to be trained in any kind of arms, like in any military fighting or Greek warfare, anything like that. But they would be educated at the same level at home while the boys would attend public school. Women would use their athletic skills in order to kind of attract a male suitor, and they would compete in sports competitions in order to showcase their athletic prowess that was considered attractive for a Spartan wife, which I love because it's such a fitting thing of a logical conclusion. What they would do is you wanted the women trained and strong. You wanted them smart. You wanted them strong. You wanted them to be the best because with eugenics, they believed that, I hate that we're actually spinning that in a positive light because of how horrible the things have happened in history associated with it. But they specifically believed that if you had a strong, educated woman, that she would give birth to strong sons who would be great warriors. Which, I mean, it's a logical sequence of like thoughts to follow. It really does make sense, but like that's...
Could you imagine you would be a horrible Spartan. First of all, you picked the least athletic wife you could find, the smallest one you could find, and the least fertile one you could find. Well, yeah, I'm tall, but I'm not particularly strong.
Our 3-year-old daughter is bigger than like all the boys of her class.
That is true.
Right?
But
like, the
that's
fact
because
is,
I'm tall.
Yeah, okay, but then we could say like, okay, no, I married you for height, right? I if she carries my chest and everything else in there, she's going to be a beast.
Well, yeah.
She could be a volleyball player.
When she hits the age of 7, you need to give her some trial by combat training.
She's already doing trials by combat, essentially, in there with all the different... I got her a sword when we went to Sweden, and she loves hitting me with that thing.
Wow. Yes, combat.
It's not like a real sword. Before anyone jumps on me for this, it's not a real sword. It's a wooden sword. I got her a wooden sword and shield, and she loves using it.
But yeah, they had to fight each other, basically. They had to show that they were athletic, that they were strong, that they were fast.
Yep.
So they could, be chosen as the mate of a person. It's actually kind of condescending if you think about it. Like, honestly, they're not getting married for their brains or their beauty, which is also awful, I guess. But
hey, if one in that is physically fit, they're more likely to be more attractive, I guess in that case.
I don't know. It's really weird. This whole thing seems like how you would pick like a horse to mate with another horse.
Yep.
So that you can
that
get
is definitely the idea.
fastest racehorse for the Kentucky Derby.
Men were basically the property of the state.
Well, yeah.
That's what they were.
Even to this day, aren't men and women in the military property of the government that they serve?
Not property necessarily, but once you are in there, you are, they say you're owned by the government because you're with them for a contracted amount of time. So,
all of my friends in the military say that they're owned by the military.
That's the
so
joke.
I just assumed they were automatically really owned by the military.
No, because there are ways to get out. There are. It's just there's not many. And the thing is, you are contractually obligated to fulfill your obligation to the state when you're doing so.
I found out recently. I'm so sorry. This is another tangent. I found out recently, you know how many times I've almost signed up for the military, right?
Yeah, you've almost signed me up like 5 times.
And my friends were like, Gabby, why would you join the military? You can't just leave. And I'm like, what do you mean? If I didn't like it, I'd put in my 2 weeks. And they were like, Gabby, you can't put in your 2 weeks for the United States Army.
This is just this little tidbit as a thing from all of you, because that did happen. She also, one night when drunk on a job that I worked previously that was a very rough time for us, decided to sign me up for every single branch of the military.
I signed myself up too. I was like, we can be a military power couple. Downside, nobody wanted me. No, I didn't get one call.
No, they did.
Well, for science, but like nothing else. And I think like I couldn't get in because I have health issues. But
no, but the Air Force looked at you.
Well, the Air Force, it's the Air Force.
Yeah, because you're the brains. That's what they wanted.
Well, yeah, but everybody wanted him, and to this day, I will not live that down.
No, I just still remember for months after I got letters, I got emails, I got phone calls, I got texts, I got everything from the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the Coast Guard,
didn't you
Space
take
Force.
ASVAB? That one test?
Yeah, I did take that test.
And you did really well, so they probably saw those scores, right?
Yeah, that's probably in the record from when I did it initially, because
I don't know how this works, I'm just assuming.
Yeah, the recruiter looked at me at that point and asked, like, why the hell are you here? You should be in an officer's program. And it's when I was looking at it like, oh, I don't know if I was going to be able to do stuff with college. I panicked like my freshman year and went and thought I would sign up for the military because I was so afraid of putting myself and my family in debt.
Anyway, we went on a really long tangent. I am so sorry.
Anyway, so the gist is, when we're going and we're talking about the military here again, right? Or not even the military, like the Spartans. What ended up happening is that while the women were having to do all of this, the Helots would take care of everything else. And Spartan women would be able to raise and take care of their children and lead the next generation. Because like Kyrgyz, he believed that the most powerful thing, the best thing in society was motherhood, because they were the ones that were raising the next generation of warriors who would be able to fight. They would be doing everything. And Spartan women were very proud of their children. They were expected to honor the city-state. They were expected to extol virtuous behavior, to do everything. And at the same time, these women would be running the farm or the estate or managing finances or all the other aspects of business that would be occurring while the men were frequently away at war. Like, they would be doing all of that. But one of the interesting things to note is that, as Gabby said, in comparison to other Greek city-states where women were typically marrying very early in their teens, Spartan women typically married later. Like, we're talking 19 or 20, which for many nowadays will still say, oh, that's early. But at that point, that is probably the healthiest thing that you could have done. So one of the reasons historically as to why people had children early is because people died early. So they would have children earlier. But the ironic thing is by having children earlier, you were more likely to die because your body wasn't fully developed and ready to go at that point. So marriage, childbirth, all these different things were generally safer and healthier for the mother and for the baby. Which that is actually, I do want to put it in as a little side note, slight misconception. We taught, like, this may have been occurring at that time for like teens, and that is something throughout all of history, but people think that in like the 17 and 1800s and all the stuff that was still occurring. Like, oh no, or like in the medieval ages, really, like, oh my God, no, they were marrying at the age of 12. Generally speaking, no.
The nobles?
The nobles were primarily the ones that were doing that, and they weren't even married. They were marrying, but they weren't consummating the marriage until the person was older, specifically because the marriage was about tying the two families together for an alliance. That's what that was all about. It was about property and everything else. Peasants were typically marrying much later because it was safer. And that's just something that they did. Now, at the same time, when, the average age to die at is like 32, this still means that you're going to have someone who gets married at the age of 21, pops out 4 kids, and then is dead on the 5th.
The 5th of the month or the 25th?
The 5th kid is what I was referring to in that case, but could be the 5th year, It happened, especially with deaths during childbirth. Very, very common. So essentially, all of this stuff, all these physical activities, everything that they were doing, it allowed them to not only get mates, is the term I'm going to use in this case. Like, what else am I going to use to describe this?
I think the men joined the military at like their 20s or...
At the age of 20, they became an official soldier of the state. Yeah.
But they really would have to spend all of their 20s in the military. So even if they were married, it wasn't until their 30s that they can actually like come back and like have time with their wives. I think some men would sneak off to, to meet their little lady.
They would.
Because they lived in barracks. That's the other thing.
Just guys being dudes with other dudes who are away from their wives for years at a time, and they get lonely.
Wait, were Spartan men...
Oh, it was Greece, Gabby. Pretty much everyone was doing things like that, yeah.
Huh. So I could have a gal pal. That's crazy. Sparta. What a place.
That's what things were pretty much like, right? Men and women were expected to marry. Like, you had to marry because you had to procreate. Procreation was the really big important thing. If you didn't marry and have kids, then this meant that you would not...
They did not like it if you didn't get married. Like,
absolutely.
That was going against their culture because, again, they didn't care that much about like the family dynamic, but they did care about replenishing their military.
You need the bodies. I don't care whether there's love between you two. You need to get to the diggity-do so we can get the bodies out.
Literally, sexual relations within a marriage were for procreation. It was very... That was the point of it. That was the purpose. That is why you did it. Also, the late marrying age of Spartan women actually, I think, was pretty cool because the men they would be marrying would be in their 20s or 30s. So the age gap was not as big as like other city-states, in the marriages. So
when you have this older established like late 30s, I don't need to say late 30s.
Even if he's in his 30s, anything under the age of, that's weird.
Yeah, there's like this established person who's built up their farm or whatever now and is going to get a young wife to start popping out babies.
Yeah, so the Spartan women actually got to avoid this. Good for them.
Yeah. So all the stuff, essentially procreation, this was the most important task for Spartan women, as it pretty much was for women around the world at the time, but there was an extra emphasis on this specifically because they needed to give birth to strong warriors. Like, that was the entire purpose. Their marriage was specifically to create children. And so what they would do is they would shave their heads, or typically they would shave their heads before marriage, and then they would keep their hair short while they were married, which was a huge practice difference between like them and other Greek city-states.
Because military men, like Greek military men, male soldiers, would shave their heads and keep it short. So these women doing that was huge.
Yeah.
No, so I could understand Athens or anybody else in the other city-states just looking at it and being like, what is going on?
Maybe when the men would sneak back away from the barracks, they wanted something familiar when they came home.
I mean, that too. I don't know their justifications here. I'm just spitting the facts.
Yeah, that's the thing we're talking about sneaking away. Because the other interesting detail is that they didn't live together. Men who were under the age of 30 were required to live in the barracks with the other men. So in order to see their wives, if they were married earlier, then these men would have to sneak back into their houses at night when they were not given leave to do so. So I mean, can you imagine having to sneak into your own house to see your wife? Like, that is insane.
Here's the thing, though. Imagine how peacefully these people slept in their own beds.
Well, that and for the fact that they would only raise the sons till the age of 7, and then off to the Agoge they would go.
So I'm guessing, okay, so these men were like, the 20-year-olds were in their like barracks because they were already in the army, and then the 7-year-olds went somewhere different. Because then they could just be like, hey, Dad.
Well, that's the barracks because they're the soldiers. The Agoge is the school.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's the school for their training. Now, we've mentioned this a couple times for the importance of Spartan women to give birth. Like that's been a large section of this entire thing. That whole role, that was not a light thing to just happen. Spartan people were typically buried without gravestones. You didn't really get much. The only people who would typically be offered a gravestone were men who died in battle and women who would die in childbirth. And so dying in childbirth was seen as a great honor, as the woman was viewed as having died in the line of duty. Like it was the female equivalent of a warrior dying in battle.
I like that. It shows that they understood the sacrifice and they respected their role.
I mean, at some points, like she'd literally be fighting for her life.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Back in the day? Come on.
Oh,
you
God.
gotta.
I want to do a podcast episode.
No, I will not participate.
I know you won't. I might need to get a guest to do that rather than just talk it myself. But I would
guest?
like,
hey, do you want to talk about childbirth practices throughout the ages?
I don't know, just like if there's really weird traditions around the world that go back historically, I would want to just cover some of those interesting little details. There's a lot of trauma in there too. Yes, I know, but it's there. It's there.
If you're listening, you can't see my face right now, but I am not. I'm not for this at all.
Now, we have seen a lot of emphasis that were placed on strong children and strong men, which of course, now we're talking about other disturbing things. It begs the question of what happened to those that were not strong enough, the ones that were weak.
When these kids were born, they were examined to see, what they looked like. Were they physically well? Did they have any deformities? And if they did, it was the mother's responsibility to dispose of that child. Okay, and this is the part I saw my coworkers that really bothered them. They had to throw their children off a really high rock, and they did this to ensure a swift death. And one question that was posed, because I'm assuming these women had a lot of kids, because that was their point, was to have a lot of children. Was there just a rock? Like just the killing rock?
I don't think it's necessarily just the killing rock, but there would be a pre-established place, I'm pretty sure.
I'm assuming, but it has to take a lot for a mother to dispose of her child. Like, I wonder how many women snuck their kids to another city, state, or to someone to take them out of there.
That's a good question. I cannot help but think that there would be some that obviously that would go through that extra mile to try and help or save the child, but also for the women who are raised in such a society that was the norm and that was the brutality of it. I can't help but think that would just be the norm.
I don't know. I feel like even the mom who genuinely believes that they're doing what is best would try to save her kid, right?
You would think.
I don't know. As a mom, it's so hard to wrap my head around. And I know it's because I live in a different society and a different time, but that is crazy to me. A high rock? They didn't even sleep in my little poison. That would have been more peaceful, I think.
There's no guarantee the child wouldn't just throw it up.
Ugh. So, yeah, that bothered me a little bit. But good for the Spartan woman.
Yeah. On to a bit of a lighter topic than what that was. Like, if we're continuing to talk about the role of Spartan women in society, and not just the role, but it's like what it is that they did in comparison to women in other Greek city-states, they were still bound by the rules of the other city-states when it came to some other practices. Like when all the city-states would get together for the Olympic Games. Because the Olympic Games would have very strict rules for participation, which meant that they did not allow women to participate at all.
I think some people even implied, some writers, that they weren't allowed to watch. Like some groups of women were not actually allowed to watch. I think married women could, but they weren't even allowed to like watch the games.
I can't even remember. I swear, I think you're right about something. If there's anyone on YouTube that sees this.
It's right there. According to Pausanias,
you had it from the notes here.
Yeah, virgin unmarried women could view the games, but married women, yeah, that's what it was, were excluded.
Okay, so it was married women that were excluded from it. See, because that's a very specific requirement. It's imagine going to a One Direction concert, right? And they're all dolled up in, I guess, this case, olive oil. Back in the day.
Okay, but I'm assuming that this rule probably came about, right? Because this is how I'm picturing this was going down. Like, you know that one TikTok audio that's like, are you dating? And he's like, oh, no, we're just friends. Shut up. We're just friends. Like, like me meeting Ryan Reynolds and my girlfriend says, oh, we're dating. Like, this is my boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I'm assuming. Like, these women, they go, and it's all about physical fitness, right? And they're going to the Olympic Games. Come on.
Yeah.
There's like some decked out competitor.
Well, Gabby, you know that most things at the Olympics, I'm pretty sure all of the events, or at least most of them, they were done naked.
See what I'm saying?
So when they were wrestling, when they were doing the Greek wrestling, they were naked.
Well, it makes sense then because the Spartan women probably would have been they would not have been that phased, but other women in other city-states would have been shocked. So it makes sense, right? The rules make a lot of sense. However, I would have loved to see it. Just
a bunch of naked men covered in olive oil, lifting heavy rocks and throwing them, and then wrestling each other and then racing.
Okay, you have got, unless you're going to throw an old-fashioned Olympic Games, you have got to stop describing it. Anyway.
See. Yeah, I see how it is. So this whole thing happens with the Olympics, right? But it was, if a person had to be there and they were female and they were not married or anything, they would have to be chaperoned. It was possible that fathers would accompany their daughters to the games. There are cases where you would have people who were there, not actually necessarily even as spectators, but as ones who would also participate in the races. We'll kind of explain this, right? There would be exceptions that would be given to certain people, such as when you had the priestesses of Demeter, who would sit atop the altar to the goddess during the games. The one area that saw actual female participation, and I say participation more as a concept than actually being in it physically, is the equestrian events, like the ones involving horses. Because equestrian affairs were something that Spartan women were actually able to do very well in, which I find very amusing for a specific detail. Horsemanship was not famous in Sparta at all. In fact, when it came to cavalry with their military, Sparta was one of the last states to adopt any form of it. And the ones who typically served in the cavalry were the old rich men who were too old or sickly or weak to fight on foot.
Well, yeah, but I think the Spartan women would
be the ones raising the horses, yeah.
Because they seem to understand horses. So they would train the horses and they would drive little like decorated carts that the horses pulled.
Oh, yeah. The men weren't the one taking care of any of the horses. No, they were doing the fighting and the other stuff with the other men. No. This is one of those duties that the women specifically would have been taken care of because I guess they were the ones not only were there to actually take care of the animals, but also would understand them a little bit better.
And this brings us to the story of the first, I guess, the girl who participated in
So you were very excited to talk about this one. Do you want to go ahead and tell it?
Oh, you can tell it because I don't want to mess it up. I think you have more of the grandeur for presentation.
Oh, the grandeur for presentation. Well, if you want to hear it. So there is this story about
Cynisca.
Yeah, is that how you pronounce the name? Cynisca?
Cynisca?
Cynisca? I'm going to say Cynisca, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have this case of the equestrian games at the Olympics where this skill that was associated with women with the horses made this Spartan woman called Cynisca the perfect candidate to enter the Olympic Games. It was very important to note that it was not her actually entering and racing on the chariot itself, like for the chariot event. This was the idea of her brother, Agesilas or
Agesilas.
Can you say that again?
I think it's Agesilas or Agesilas.
Considering what it is for Greek, I'd say Agesilas. Maybe?
Maybe.
Because like agogi. So perhaps that's what it is. But essentially you have Agesilas, right? According to some writers, Agesilas' aim with getting his sister to participate in the equestrian games with the horses that she had raised. She wasn't actually on the chariots racing them, but she's the one that raised and bred the horses that participated with the riders that were then controlling them.
But he really just wanted her to participate so that he could prove that victories won in that way were a function merely of wealth. So it
not
wasn't
actual
skill.
ability. Yeah.
That's the thing. He wanted to just show that anybody can win this if they're wealthy enough. It wasn't like all the other victories because he didn't think this one necessarily took skill. You just had to be wealthy enough to have the horse and the cart and the time to train, I guess. I'm not really sure what his point was, but he just wanted to show that she could do this because she was wealthy.
Yeah, the whole thing was, it's cool that she was able to do it, but the bad thing about the story is that the entire thing is to point out, look at how stupid this thing is. This doesn't belong in the Olympics. Even a woman could do it.
Pretty much.
That is literally the idea behind it.
So it's not great how it came about.
No, it's not great how it came about. The fact that she won and that her name was then inscribed onto statues and was honored from then on out, that is a great thing. But this whole thing was done specifically as a means by which to shame the event because it did not actually matter. There was no skill to it necessarily. For the individual competitor, it was who bred the best horse because they could afford to buy the best stud or whatever for it. So as you said, it was a matter of wealth, not anything else. So as that whole story goes, at least according to Plutarch, right, you had King Agesilas who noticed that some Greek citizens were taking too much pride in breeding racehorses and would give themselves great airs in consequence. Basically it means that they got too arrogant because, oh, look at us, we have the best horses. So he persuaded his sister, Siniska, to enter the chariot team at the Olympic Games. Siniska entered her horses as early as possible and won in 2 successive Olympiads in 396 and 392 BC. And so according to Pausanias, Siniska had longed to succeed in the Olympic Games, and she became the first woman not only to win the Olympic Games, but also to own race horses for it. Her quadriga, which can I say that is an awesome name? I love that, but it's literally just 4-horse chariot. It's like the 4-horse cart that would be carried. That was a massive testament to the huge wealth that she had, and thus she and her contemporaries, the people around her, that is what you needed to be declared a winner. So again, this whole thing kind of comes from a guy going and basically using his sister to shame other people for being wealthy, and that it wasn't actually a test of skill.
Well, I think what he went on to say is that even wealthy male racehorse owners, they didn't actually drive the horses themselves.
Oh, yeah, no, they just got jockeys.
So she wasn't even present at the event, I don't think. Because
that is hilarious.
Yeah, women
actually.
were not permitted to attend the game. So she was not actually there when she won. But she did get commemorative monuments. Just like the men did.
I wasn't allowed to participate. I wasn't physically there. I didn't see it, but I got a statue.
But she, more than likely, I'm sure she trained the horses. And you know.
Yeah. It's just one of those things when we go back to it. They could do things like this, but women were not typically permitted to attend the games, so she couldn't.
And they still had to follow the rules of the other Greek city-states. Like, they couldn't just say, hey, we're Sparta, so we're going to show up.
The whole event was sacred. It would have turned everyone against them if they had done so. So Siniska's image that they created, it stood in a sanctuary. You had a guy called Apelles of Megara who designed a sculpture of her chariot, her horses, and the charioteer in bronze, as well as a statue of Siniska herself. And these statues were then erected at Olympia, and they were the first monuments that were dedicated by a woman to commemorate victories at the Pan-Hellenic competitions.
And posthumously.
Yes.
That word has always been.
Oh, no, I understand.
But she was awarded a heroine shrine in Sparta.
That is actually incredibly cool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, other women, this is, I think, the detail that I was thinking about earlier. Other women, especially Spartans, would follow her example. And Pausanias records this as being a trend. Some would manage to win some Olympic victories, but none of them were as famous as this lady was. And as an example of that is a Spartan woman by the name of Eurylonis, or Eurylonis? Eurylonis. I'm pretty sure it's Eurylonis. So, I mean, after those two women participated, there were others that would, when you had the successor Greek states that would follow, like in the case of after Alexander's conquests. But really, at the end, there's not all that much that we can prove more definitively.
Because it's super fragmented. Like,
incredibly. Yeah.
Did look. I mean, you have to dig through so many sources, and then you can't really corroborate them.
No.
Across multiple sources. You just have to take it at face value. Like, they did participate sometimes. They did win. They were honored. But how common it was, I don't think every single woman, like, women may have participated and not won. And then they're not sure if the women that participated in special events for other women or if they participated against men. So it's so unclear, but I did think it was really cool that there were women that participated and they did get honored. And I did want to include that, but it was just really, really hard.
Of course, we have to be careful because this is something that I've always had to tell people. I love covering different aspects of, say, women in history, because the unfortunate reality is that there are way too many cases where stuff is simply not covered because it wasn't written down or the sources were lost, and not nearly as much was done recording the actions, the deeds, and the day-to-day experiences and things that we would want to know today about the women back then.
Like,
and
obviously they were very important. They kept society populated and going. They kept it running, but if no one was writing it down, it's just really, really hard to tell the stories.
Correct. And then you have the people nowadays, and this is why we always have to be careful. And I'm glad that you did a very good job with going through and finding everything, because if you want to look up women in X time in whatever and just pull up like a dozen different articles, you are going to find any number of things that are filled with two types of things. Either something that is completely disregarding them, or one that is yas queening everything, that is just putting every half-truth or little rumor detail of, oh, it could be like this, guesswork, that you can't really discern what is truth and what is not. But it wants to put them in a good light.
Those, like, at one point I had 2 articles that were basically covering Spartan women, but they were opposite, I guess, in a way.
Did one of them try to say that they also fought?
Yeah.
Because it's like, you get the stuff like that.
I would understand why they would not let them, because they had to have kids. Like, you can't let the people who are going to keep your population going die in battle.
Technically speaking, you could have 10 men and 100 women. You will pop out the same amount of babies as you would 100 men and 100 women. Like, you can't risk the women on the front line because you specifically need them for creating the kids.
And also, they had to handle, like, all of the business.
Yeah.
I mean, the society would have collapsed. They were actually able to participate in city planning.
Yeah. Oh, that's a huge detail.
And, like, local government. Like, that is unheard of in other Greek city-states at this time. Like, the women were not involved in any planning. So, Spartan women did have a lot of rights, but it also had a lot of cost.
We've had to say a lot of things over the course of this podcast of like, and we have to be careful when saying this. And just please note, if you hear it for like the 8th time that we say it, it's because, again, we do have to be very careful with this because there is a lot of both contradictory work and guesswork that comes into creating the repertoire of information that we're able to talk about.
I think what would be really cool is to look at the history of the Olympic Games and then just Spartan society as a whole, or Greek
There's a lot more that we could do with a
City-state.
lot of this.
There is so much. Like, I had so much information. Picking what went into this episode was so difficult. Like, now I have no idea how you do this multiple times a week for
I know,
multiple
right?
podcast episodes. Because I was so overwhelmed that I pulled up every single like source, read through them, went to bed, left it for 2 days. I went back to it like, okay, I dreamt that I can put some of this together in my head. Like, I just had to process it. I had to let it just ruminate. Like, it was a lot to just come at you at once.
But with that, I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you to everyone who has watched, who has listened. Again, if you have not checked out the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel, please do check that.
And make sure to get this month's book club pick because it's one of my favorites, Tin Can Soldiers.
Yeah, well, Tin Can Sailors.
Yeah, sorry.
I did that once. In a video. I said Tin Can Soldiers. I got so many people that were pissed off at me for that.
I mean, they could be soldiers who were sailing.
It's like, it depends on the classification of what we're talking about here, because they'll say like, no, they were Navy, you know, they're not soldiers, they're seamen. I can see the look on your face.
I don't have a look on my, this is my face.
For anyone that's listening to this right now on like Apple or Spotify or whatever, you go to the very end of this right now and you look at my wife's face and you just see her
I'm
snort.
not, guys, wait, Navy men aren't soldiers? What is the I thought a soldier is someone who fights, and people in the Navy fight.
This is why when I've talked about stuff
I'm offended for
historically,
them.
this is why we're talking historically for like terminology. Before you could use
Seamen
a soldier,
deserve rights too.
yeah, you could use a soldier or a Marine, or you could use, there's all kinds of different terminology depending on the time and place. I say soldier because I use it per the definition of like one who fights. Like in the case of warrior. But no, with the military, they're very specific.
See, that's my problem. I need to know more about the military.
Well,
maybe my next podcast will be a military history
oh,
podcast.
that'd be an interesting one.
But anyway, thank you guys for listening.
Hope you all have a good rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye, guys.
Bye.